Kaylin Myrick and Leora Vane seemed like the perfect newlyweds, young, beautiful, and dangerously adventurous. But when their twisted fantasy with 4 strangers ended in an unexpected pregnancy and a string of brutal murders, their dream life unraveled into a chilling nightmare. What began as a night of forbidden pleasure soon turned into a deadly game of secrets, blackmail, and betrayal. And someone was keeping score. Kaylin Myrick and Leora Vane were the type of couple that everyone envied. They had the kind of life that looked perfect from the outside. Newly married, beautiful home, well-paying jobs, and glowing smiles that never hinted at anything dark. Their wedding had been lavish, set on a vineyard with white roses and designer tuxedos. Friends toasted to their fairy tale love, and even strangers who saw their pictures online couldn't help but feel a twinge of jealousy. But fairy tales don't always have happy endings. Sometimes they hide monsters inside. The truth was that Kaylin and Leora had always pushed boundaries, both emotionally and physically. Their relationship thrived on control, thrill, and secrecy. Beneath, their charming surface lived a hunger that had never been satisfied, something darker, something reckless. Kaylin, a successful real estate investor, enjoyed living on the edge. He was calculated, persuasive, and always in control. Leora, a former therapist turned online life coach, had a deep fascination with taboo behavior. Together, they explored fantasies most couples only joked about. For them, trust meant pushing limits together. Weeks after their honeymoon in Iceland, they returned to North Carolina with an idea that had been brewing long before they even got married. It wasn't sudden. It was planned. They wanted to invite strangers into their most intimate world. It wasn't about love. It wasn't about boredom. It was about power and detachment, bringing chaos into their carefully curated world, just to see if they could control it. After creating an encrypted email address and a private server for communication, they posted a cryptic message on a hidden adult forum. Beautiful newlywed couple seeks 4 strangers for one unforgettable night. Total secrecy required. Must obey rules. No questions asked. It didn't take long before replies flooded in. Most were ignored. Too eager, too reckless, or too invasive. But 4 stood out. Each of them had something broken inside them, something that made them perfect for the game. Drexlin Poe was a nomadic artist with a criminal record and nothing to lose. Velma Roon, a nurse in a local hospital, had a hidden addiction to risk and adrenaline. Jorik Talon, recently discharged from the military, lived off the grid and carried trauma like a shadow. And Kamari Quell, a struggling university student, needed money but also craved validation in all the wrong places. All 4 received a cryptic message back with a time, a place, and 3 simple rules. No personal questions. No phones, no second chances. The location was a remote cabin deep in the Blue Ridge Mountains, surrounded by forest and isolation. Kaylin had inherited it from a late uncle. It hadn't been used in years, and that was exactly what they wanted. No neighbors, no signal, no interference. When the day came, all 6 individuals arrived separately. The strangers were welcomed into a dimly lit space filled with candles, music, and locked boxes. Drinks were served in unlabeled bottles. Every element of the environment was designed by Kaylin and Leora to create control and remove identity. The strangers were stripped of who they were before they entered. The couple was no longer interested in people. They were playing with pieces on a board. Hours passed, and lines were crossed. There was no way to tell who initiated what. The night became a blur of sensation, detachment, and moments that none of them could fully remember. But what no one knew, not even Leora, was that Kaylin had more cameras hidden in the cabin than necessary. He wasn't just playing host. He was documenting everything, cataloging secrets he might one day use as alcohol. The sun began to rise. The group quietly dispersed. No names exchanged, No word spoken. Only the couple remained behind, cleaning up the traces. To them, it was a thrilling success. But something unexpected lingered in the air as they locked the door and left. Kaylin looked at Leora and felt a cold chill, not of fear, but anticipation. Something irreversible had begun that night, and it would not end with pleasure. A week passed after the night in the cabin, and life appeared to return to normal for Kaylin and Leora. They resumed their carefully polished routines: gym in the morning, business calls in the afternoon, dinner, with wine at sunset. But something had shifted beneath the surface. The experience hadn't satisfied them. It had unsettled them. They had tried to control chaos, but now chaos had planted a seed. It began with Leora's nausea. At first, she brushed it off as food poisoning or stress, but when it persisted, for days, she knew she had to take a test. In the privacy of their ensuite bathroom, she stared down at the plus sign on the pregnancy stick. Her hands trembled. Only one person in the world knew that Kaylin couldn't have children. They had tried for over a year in secret. Several fertility tests later, the truth was revealed. Kaylin was infertile. They had agreed never to tell anyone. But now Leora was pregnant, and the only explanation lay in that one wild night in the cabin. The realization struck them both like a blade. Leora broke the news to Kaylin with a flat tone, as if reading a death sentence. His silence was louder than any scream. He didn't accuse her. He didn't have to. They both knew what this meant. While they argued behind closed doors about what to do, an even more pressing issue was unfolding. Drexlin Poe, the tattooed drifter, had stopped responding to messages. Not that they were reaching out socially, but Kaylin had created an anonymous email to track the four strangers' online activity. He had been monitoring them out of paranoia, or perhaps obsession. Drexlin had been active for days after the cabin, night, posting vague messages and artwork online. Then he vanished. 3 weeks after that night, hikers found his body half submerged in a muddy creek, face down and covered in stab wounds. The police believed it was drug-related. Drexlin had a known history of dealing and had recently been involved in a violent confrontation at a local bar. His death was written off as the result of a dangerous lifestyle. But Kaylin and Leora knew better. He had been part of their secret, and now he was dead. Leora's anxiety skyrocketed. She began having vivid nightmares and refused to leave the house. She searched the internet endlessly for news of the other 3 participants. Kamari Quell had deactivated her social media. Vel Maroon hadn't updated her blog. Jorik Talon's online footprint was almost non-existent. Every bit of silence felt like a countdown. They debated what to do about the baby. Leora considered terminating the pregnancy, fearing the child might be a reminder of a mistake. But Kaylin disagreed. A quiet coldness had grown inside him. In his mind, the child wasn't just a problem, it was a threat. He believed it was evidence. If DNA tests were ever done, it could unravel everything. Still, they delayed any decision. Then came a strange package in the mail. No return address. Inside was a flash drive containing a single video file. When Kaylin opened it, he found footage from a hidden angle inside the cabin, an angle he didn't set up. The video was blurry but showed all 6 individuals, clearly engaging in the night's activities. It was edited with music and distorted text that simply read, "One down, who's next?" Kaylin's stomach dropped. Someone else had been recording. Someone else knew. Leora broke down. She wanted to confess everything, go to the police, tell them it had all been a mistake. But Kaylin refused. He erased the drive and burned the envelope. To him, exposure was worse than guilt. If someone was playing a game, they would have to be dealt with, one by one if necessary. A new sense of dread settled over them. They had begun this for control and excitement. Now they were losing both. And what had started as a fantasy was beginning to unravel into something far more sinister. The first body had surfaced. The pregnancy couldn't be ignored. And someone out there was watching. Jorik Talon sat in the dim corner of a motel room outside Chattanooga, staring at the warning letter he'd received in his mailbox just 2 days earlier. The paper was folded with surgical precision, the words printed in bold. "They're watching. Stay quiet." It wasn't signed. There was no return address, no fingerprints. Just those chilling words. He hadn't spoken to anyone from the cabin night since it happened. In fact, after that strange night, he had vowed to disappear again. But now, someone had found him, and they wanted him silent. Jorik wasn't the kind of man who frightened easily. He had done 3 tours overseas and seen the worst humanity could offer. But this was different. This wasn't a battlefield. It was a trap, and he was caught in it. He reached out to Velma Rune and Kamari Quell using encrypted emails. Both responded within a day. Velma admitted she was also feeling watched. Her apartment door had been found slightly ajar last week, and her laptop had been tampered with. Kamari said someone had called her late at night, whispering her name and then hanging up. None of them trusted each other fully, but fear created temporary alliances. They agreed to meet in a crowded public library to avoid surveillance. Sitting separately but close enough to whisper, they pieced together what they knew. Drexlin was dead. No one believed the official story. Velma confessed something that stunned both of them. She had been keeping a written journal about the night at the cabin. She had recorded everything in case something went wrong. The journal contained names, timelines, even sketches of the layout. She had stored it in a locked drawer in her apartment. Jorik was furious but said nothing. That journal was a ticking time bomb. Kamari was equally horrified, insisting Velma destroy it. Velma promised she would, but she lied. That night, someone broke into her apartment. No valuables were taken. The place was ransacked, but only one thing was missing: the journal. The next morning, Velma was found slumped over the steering wheel of her car in the hospital parking garage. The initial assumption was an overdose. She was found with a half-used vial of morphine and a syringe in her lap. She was pronounced dead at the scene. The hospital mourned her loss publicly, but behind the scenes, the autopsy raised questions. Her body showed bruising on the neck and upper arms, consistent with restraint, but there was no further investigation. The morphine was enough to close the file. Jorik knew the truth. Someone had silenced her. He went dark again, ditching his phone, cutting off all ties. Kamari, terrified, tried to leave town, but she never made it. Her disappearance barely made headlines. Her phone was found at the edge of a wooded trail with blood on the casing. Police classified her as a runaway. No body was found. No investigation was pursued. Now 3 of the 6 people from that night were gone: Drexlin, Velma, and Kamari. Only Jorik remained, aside from Kaylin and Leora. He suspected them from the beginning. The entire setup had felt too controlled, too planned. The way Kaylin directed the night, the hidden cameras, the strict rules. It wasn't random. It was orchestrated. Jorik knew he was next, but he wasn't going to wait for someone to find him. He started digging into the couple's background. He found the property records for the cabin. He tracked down business filings under Kaylin's name. He even found Leora's old psychology license and client records. The deeper he went, the more disturbed he became. These weren't reckless thrill seekers. They were manipulators. And now they were murderers. Jorik didn't want revenge. He wanted to survive. So he devised a plan. He started recording his findings, uploading them to a secure server only he could access. He left clues in separate safety deposit boxes across 2 states, and he made contact with someone unexpected, a retired sheriff he once worked with on a security detail. Quietly, carefully, he began building a case from the shadows. But he also knew one thing with certainty. If Kaylin and Leora found out he was still alive, he wouldn't be for long. Jorik Talon had always trusted his instincts, and now they were screaming at him. He knew he had become the last loose thread in a deadly game spun by two people who were no longer hiding their true selves. Kaylin and Leora had transformed from thrill-seeking newlyweds into something colder, calculated, and undeniably dangerous. 3 of the strangers from the cabin night were dead or missing, and he was certain that he was next on their list. But what they didn't know was that he had stopped running. He was setting a trap of his own. For weeks, Jorik had stayed off-grid, living in a remote cabin he'd purchased under a false name months prior. It was far from any neighbors, buried in the Tennessee woods. There, he reviewed every piece of information he had collected: bank transactions, property records, clinic visits, even old social media posts. One particular discovery hit him hard. Leora had recently tried to schedule an abortion under a different name. The paperwork had been flagged for insurance reasons and quietly canceled by the clinic. Jorik intercepted the flagged file through a contact who still worked in medical administration. It was proof not only of the pregnancy, but of Leora's desperation to erase the evidence. The child she carried was a living time bomb. Kaylin knew it wasn't his. That knowledge alone had likely driven their actions since that night. Jorik copied the clinic records, along with a backup of all his findings, onto 2 flash drives. One he hid in the wall of his cabin. The other he mailed to the retired sheriff he trusted, Miles Granger, a no-nonsense man who owed Jorik a favor from years ago. Jorik didn't explain much, only that if anything happened to him, the sheriff should go straight to the media. Meanwhile, Kaylin had been trying to trace Jorik's location. He searched property sales, tracked old contacts, and even visited Velma's apartment again, hoping to find a trail. Nothing. The lack of information only fueled his rage. Leora, now in her 3rd trimester, had grown paranoid and isolated. The fear of exposure weighed heavier than the child inside her. She wanted to run, change names, disappear. But Kaylin had another idea: erase the last threat. One stormy evening, Jorik's cabin motion sensor was triggered. He watched the live feed from a trail camera he had installed. 2 dark figures approached the house. He didn't panic. He had prepared for this. Inside the cabin were hidden cameras in every corner, and voice-activated recorders placed under the furniture. As Kaylin and Leora broke in, dressed in black, they didn't realize they were walking into their own confession booth. They tore through drawers and cabinets, looking for files, devices, anything that could tie them to the deaths. They spoke, in hurried whispers, but the microphones caught everything. Leora said they should have killed Jorik when they had the chance. Kaylin replied that he wouldn't make the same mistake twice. Then, as they poured gasoline along the walls, they didn't realize Jorik was already miles away, watching it all unfold from a rented RV with a satellite connection. When the fire ignited, it consumed the entire cabin within minutes. Local authorities were called to the scene, assuming it was a wildfire or accidental blaze. That was until investigators discovered a charred body in the basement. It was unrecognizable, but early signs suggested it was female. Kaylin and Leora fled the scene, unaware that the entire break-in had been recorded and that the sheriff already had the footage in hand. Days later, the sheriff received DNA results from the remains. It wasn't Jorik. It was Kamari Quell. She hadn't run away. She had been murdered, her body hidden and burned by the very couple who had orchestrated the entire nightmare. With this new evidence, the sheriff reopened the case. Arrest warrants were prepared. Kaylin and Leora, now fugitives, were unaware that their perfect world was about to collapse. What began as a night of control had become a war of survival, and Jorik, once their prey, had now become the executioner of their downfall. 2 weeks after the fire, news headlines quietly reported that the remains of a young woman had been positively identified as Kamari Quell. The manner of death was ruled a homicide. Her family, once left in the dark, was now grappling with the devastating truth. But behind the headlines, something far more significant was unfolding. A manhunt was underway for Kaylin Myrick and Leora Vane, now officially named as suspects in the disappearance and deaths of multiple individuals tied to a remote cabin in the Blue Ridge Mountains. The media didn't have the full story. Authorities chose to keep many details sealed to avoid tipping off the suspects. But they had enough. Video evidence of the couple breaking into Jorik's cabin, audio of them discussing prior murders, and forensic confirmation that Kamari's body had been stored and burned there. The pieces were no longer scattered. They formed a clear and damning puzzle. Kaylin and Leora had vanished. Their home was found empty, their cars abandoned in a remote county an hour away. Leora had left behind her prenatal vitamins, suggesting they left in a rush. For all their planning, they had finally become what they feared, fugitives without control. Jorik, no longer hiding, had taken a bold step. He appeared anonymously on a major investigative podcast, sharing his account under the alias Aaron. His distorted voice described the night at the cabin, the mysterious disappearances, and the psychological games Kaylin and Leora had played. He didn't reveal names or dates, but made it clear that two very dangerous people were still out there. The podcast went viral. Within days, amateur sleuths, former acquaintances, and even people who had crossed paths with Kaylin or Leora in the past began flooding online forums with tips and speculation. Someone recognized Leora's face from a gas station in Arkansas. Another said Kaylin had rented a room under a fake name in Nevada. Sightings poured in, but the couple stayed one step ahead. But cracks were beginning to show. Leora was heavily pregnant, and traveling without proper care was taking a toll. In a small town in Arizona, she collapsed outside a convenience store. A bystander called 911. When paramedics arrived, she gave a false name, claiming she had no ID and was just passing through. Her appearance was disheveled, and she was barely coherent. But while being transported to a local clinic, she slipped into labor. The child was delivered via emergency cesarean section. The hospital staff had no idea they were tending to one of the most wanted women in the country until someone made a mistake. Kaylin returned to the clinic that night to retrieve Leora and the baby. Surveillance footage showed a man matching his description entering through a staff-only door using forged credentials. A nurse recognized the face from a true crime article she had read just 2 days earlier. She quietly alerted security. By the time Kaylin reached the recovery room, police were already in the building. He bolted but was tackled before making it to the parking lot. Leora, weak and unconscious, was placed under arrest hours later after regaining consciousness. The infant was taken into protective custody. Back in North Carolina, prosecutors were ready. Kaylin was charged with conspiracy to commit murder, arson, unlawful disposal of human remains, and obstruction of justice. Leora faced the same, in addition to charges of accessory to murder and endangerment of a child. Both pleaded not guilty. Their defense team tried to paint them as victims of manipulation by the 4 strangers, but the evidence said otherwise. Video, journal entries, DNA, and their own words sealed their fate. Jorik, watching it all unfold from afar, felt a strange emptiness. He had survived. He had exposed them. But nothing could undo the lives lost or the trauma endured. The baby born from that horrific night remained in the care of child services. Its identity and future kept private. The story of Kaylin and Leora, the seemingly perfect couple, turned predators, captivated the nation. But in the end, their legacy wasn't power, control, or pleasure. It was death, ruin, and a child born into a nightmare no one would ever fully understand.